South Vietnam, 1966. Elite U.S. paratroops jump into action in the biggest operation of the Vietnam War to date. Holland, 1944. British and American paratroops fill the skies in the largest and most ambitious airborne plan ever launched. Assault from the air is always bold and risky. No other strategy depends so much on precise timing and coordination of forces. Every commander knows that this battle plan should be used only when there is no other option. The battle plan is assault from the air. Vietnam, 1966. The Viet Cong believe they are gaining ground in their ongoing guerrilla war against the U.S. military. They have established key areas in the south, which they use as supply bases and holding areas for their forces. One of these areas is what the American military has designated as War Zone C. War Zone C is northwest of the South Vietnamese capital Saigon, along the border with Cambodia. It's the base for the 9th Viet Cong Division and the 101st North Vietnamese Army Regiment, and it's the location of the political headquarters of the Communist Central Office in South Vietnam. The American commander-in-chief in Vietnam is General William Westmoreland. For him, War Zone C is a thorn in his side, and he wants it taken care of. Westmoreland orders the area commander, General Jonathan Seaman, to prepare an operation against the Viet Cong forces in the zone. The operation will be the largest in the Vietnam War to date. But how can Seaman insert troops fast enough into War Zone C to take and hold it before the enemy has time to react? Europe, September 1944. 3 months after the D-Day landings, Allied forces have broken out of Normandy and pushed across France and into Belgium. In the northeast, they face Hitler's Siegfried Line. The Allied advance is grinding to a halt, and a new battle plan is needed to push onward into Germany. The task falls on General Louis Brereton and his team of battle planners. How can they rekindle the Allied advance, bypass the German defenses, and possibly end the war by Christmas? Junction City, the American plan to attack War Zone C, and Market Garden, the Allied plan to open the road to Berlin. Both groups of battle planners need to achieve speed and surprise, and each chooses the same risky solution: assault from the air. Assault from the air is war on a knife edge. For it to stand a chance of succeeding, there are specific requirements each of these operations must follow. Objective: to take and hold a position behind enemy lines that is inaccessible to conventional ground forces. If there is a viable ground-based alternative, air assault should not be considered. Intelligence: when landing, airborne troops are especially vulnerable, so up-to-date accurate intelligence is vital on what enemy forces are waiting on the ground, where they are, and how strong they are. Air control: commanders must achieve control of the air to protect their forces from enemy aircraft while they're being transported to the target, and to neutralize any ground defenses which might jeopardize their landing. Speed and surprise: the essence of any air assault is to arrive at the target without warning, if possible, securing it before the enemy has had time to react or to mount a proper defense. Reinforcement. Airborne troops are limited logistically in what they carry. Everything they need, they have to take with them. They are lightly armed, so they have to be resupplied and reinforced.
Air assault should really only be used when other forms of warfare cannot achieve the same objectives. An insertion by air can allow troops to get into areas otherwise inaccessible by other troops. It's therefore a very special type of operations. Airborne troops are like a special reserve. They should only be used in very specific circumstances to take very specific military objectives.
But the battle plan for air assault has two fundamental weaknesses. Landing. Whether they insert by parachute, glider, or helicopter, airborne troops are exposed as they come into land. In this critical phase, they cannot fight back. They are at the mercy of the defenders. Time limit. Because they are so lightly armed, there is a time limit within which they have to be reinforced. That has to be fast. Normally, it's 48 hours maximum. Assault from the air is the last great development in warfare. It introduces a third dimension to the battlefield. It allows forces to go over the top of the enemy, what military planners call vertical envelopment. And it has developed with technology. From parachutes and gliders to the delivery of airborne troops by helicopter.
Used correctly, an assault from the skies can achieve stunning results. Used improperly, however, it can result in the complete annihilation of the airborne force.
The idea for mass assault by air came not in World War II, but World War I. In 1917, Colonel William "Billy" Mitchell, better known for his championing of the use of air power for ground attack, proposed the capture of Metz in France by dropping 10,000 men by parachute behind enemy lines. The man charged with drawing up the plan was Mitchell's assistant, Major Louis Brereton. The idea was ultimately rejected, but Brereton would not disappear from the theater of airborne warfare. The first soldiers to make a successful drop using a static line were a unit of Italian paratroops on exercises in November 1927. Within a few years, the Soviet Union would take parachuting to a whole new level. Seeking to weld the country together, Soviet leaders introduced vast schemes of nationwide sporting activities, including parachuting. The military application was never far away. In 1930, parachute units were included in Red Army maneuvers as small intruder parties. In 1935, the Red Army made battalion-sized descents. In 1936, it was dropping brigades. The real architect of assault from the air, however, is considered to be German Major General Kurt Student. In 1938, when Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring decided to set up what he called a parachute entry force, the man he turned to was Kurt Student, a former World War I fighter pilot with 5 kills to his credit. By the beginning of World War II, Student's Fallschirmjäger, parachute hunters, numbered 4,500 men. His airborne troops were considered an elite. Student also developed the concept of troop-carrying gliders. It was Student who would be responsible for the first major combat air assault ever launched. And it would also be Student who would command key elements of the German defensive forces when the Allies launched Operation Market Garden 3 years later. Which, in the irony of war, would set him against the man who had planned the first ever air assault a quarter of a century before, Louis Brereton, now a general. Assault from the air is war on a knife edge. So the first essential requirement for a successful assault from the air is that the war commander must be clear why he is doing it. What is his objective? Is assault from the air the only way his goals can be achieved? This requirement was first shown in the Mediterranean in April 1941. While the armies of Adolf Hitler occupied most of Europe, the island of Crete was still firmly in Allied hands. Taking Crete would give Hitler a key strategic base in the eastern Mediterranean. But the British Royal Navy dominated the seas of the area, so there was only one way to get to Crete and seize the island: assault from the air. Based on this tactical situation, Kurt Student ordered his paratroops and glider-borne forces to land on the island's airfields and the port of Suda. Reinforcements would be landed by Junkers Ju-52 transports, and when the port had been seized, by sea. The plan is what airborne forces call a seize and hold operation. Operation Market Garden, 1944. Allied generals Eisenhower and Montgomery consider their options for the next stage of war in Europe. 3 months after D-Day, the Allies have broken out from Normandy and pushed across France. Then the advance has faltered. In the northeast, they are faced by the Siegfried Line. The strategic plan to restart the advance by the normally cautious British Field Marshal Montgomery is bold. He will bypass the Siegfried Line and sweep into Germany through the back door, while U.S. forces push through the line. The key to the plan are the bridges across the southern Dutch waterways. They must be taken and held. But these vital bridges are deep behind enemy lines, which means that Montgomery only has one way of seizing them: assault from the air. Airborne troops will insert by parachute and glider. They will capture the bridges and lay what the military calls an airborne carpet along the route which the planned Allied advance will take. The man tasked with turning Montgomery's bold vision into a detailed battle plan is American General Louis Brereton, the man who devised the first ever plan for assault from the air.
This operation was the boldest, the most audacious airborne operation of the Second World War, potentially of all time. Dropping 35,000 troops of 3 nations behind enemy lines, some of them 64 miles behind enemy lines, was a massive undertaking and a remarkable thing to do so late in the war. But the potential gains were massive. The aim to end the war in Europe by Christmas 1944.
Incredibly, Brereton and his airborne commanders are given just 6 days to plan and prepare. This is the battle plan they come up with. The American 101st Airborne will drop into southern Holland and take the bridges and potential choke points between Eindhoven and Grave. The American 82nd Airborne will drop 10 miles further north and take the bridges in the area between Grave and Nijmegen. Another 20 miles further north, the British 1st Airborne Division, to be joined later by the 1st Polish Parachute Brigade, will seize and hold the most northerly target, the bridges at Arnhem. All 3 groups will be reinforced by further parachute drops and glider landings of men and equipment. And all 3 groups will be relieved by the tanks of the British 30 Corps, racing hard and fast from Belgium. First, the 101st, then the 82nd, and finally, the British 1st. If all of these elements come together, then the road to Germany and to Berlin will be open. But for Brereton and his battle planners, victory is anything but certain. Operation Junction City, Vietnam, 1967. Elite members of the U.S. 82nd Airborne Division are briefed before dropping into the battle zone in their assault from the air. As General Jonathan Seaman and his battle planners look at how to surround the Viet Cong in War Zone C, they have a tool in their arsenal unavailable in World War II: the helicopter.
No longer do you have a fixed-wing aircraft that is highly vulnerable in the air. Now you have a flexible method of insertion, a helicopter that can land men and, importantly, can take them out of the battle zone again at very short notice.
The fleet of helicopters bought by the Army and Marine Corps in the late 1950s and early 1960s sees its first use in combat over the jungles of Vietnam. This was an environment where the definitive virtue of the helicopter, its ability to land just about anywhere, was particularly useful.
Faced with the objective of cutting off and crushing Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces, General Seaman and his battle planners aim to use this new flexibility alongside more traditional methods. General Seaman's plan is to create a horseshoe, a massive inverted U around War Zone C. Prior to Junction City, he will launch two other operations: Gadsden and Tucson. They will be part of a deception plan. And they will also put into position two of the 4 units who will take part in Operation Junction City. Along the west side of the horseshoe, then the east. Other elements will be in position to press up from the south on D+1. To achieve maximum surprise on D-Day itself, assault from the air will be used to seal off the top of the horseshoe. 8 air-mobile landings using helicopters, and 1 parachute drop. A battalion of the 173rd Airborne Brigade, part of the 82nd Airborne Division, will go in first by parachute. It will establish a secure zone for a parachute drop of heavier weapons and equipment, which is planned for just 30 minutes after their drop. Then the battalion will be reinforced by other units of the 173rd, flown in by helicopter. Once in position, they will assume an infantry role to complete the overall objective of Operation Junction City: eliminate the Viet Cong in War Zone C, and set up special forces bases to secure the area. So in both cases, Junction City and Market Garden, the battle planners decide that assault from the air offers the only or the best chance of success. And on paper, both appear to fulfill the first requirement for the battle plan. Now, they need to put it into action. Vietnam, 1966. American General Seaman arrives at his local headquarters to finalize the last details of Operation Junction City. He knows that intelligence is a key requirement of any battle plan. But in the battle plan for assault from the air, where troops will drop behind the lines, it's even more important. And General Seaman would have studied the role that intelligence played in the first major assault from the air: Kurt Student's Operation Mercury against Crete. Operation Mercury involved the landing of over 15,000 men by glider, parachute, and air transport. Against his forces, Student and his planners estimated that the Allies had about 5,000 men spread out across the island. But the intelligence on which Student drew up his battle plan was wrong. Allied defenders on the island did not number 5,000, but nearer 40,000. The garrison on Crete had been strengthened by men evacuated from Greece. Kurt Student and his German planners had built their battle plan for Operation Mercury and the assault on Crete on bad intelligence, and they would pay a heavy price for it. In Vietnam, for Operation Junction City, little intelligence is available about the area into which the 503rd will drop. To seek to gather such intelligence might give the game away. Other units, like those which will man the east and west sides of the horseshoe, only do so with a deception smokescreen in place. Those from the south will only move up after D-Day itself. When the 503rd jump, therefore, they won't know what will be waiting for them. In terms of the intelligence for the immediate drop, the Junction City battle planners may not have met the requirement. But they're confident that the speed and surprise of their well-equipped forces will more than compensate for their lack of information. But what about the intelligence for Operation Market Garden? After D-Day and the breakout from Normandy, the Allies expect that the German opposition to Market Garden will be confused and weak. If the paratroops can seize their targets, then 30 Corps should be able to push through light opposition and reach them quickly. At one stage, they might have been correct. But Allied indecision about where and how to advance gives the Germans time to regroup and reinforce. By an extraordinary coincidence, one of the commanders of German troops in southern Holland is Kurt Student, the architect of assault from the air. Market Garden is scheduled for September 17th. Between September 12th and the 17th, German combat strength in the area is doubled. 2 Waffen SS Panzer divisions, with their tanks, move into the Arnhem area after their retreat from Normandy. Although weakened and under strength, they are still a formidable fighting force, especially against lightly armed airborne troops. Even today, there is debate over whether the Allied planners knew they were there.
There are huge myths that hang around this operation in 1944. One of them, of course, is that the British, in particular, didn't know that there were SS Panzer divisions in the area. In fact, new research has shown that they did know that they were there. They knew exactly what they were up against. They were up against a strong armoured formation. The fact that the operation went ahead nonetheless shows that the commanders thought that it was worthwhile. Because the gains were potentially so huge, they were willing to sacrifice some airborne troops to get the largest gain that any operation can possibly achieve, and that's the ending of the war in Europe.
So in Operation Market Garden, at least in one critical area, the Allies have good intelligence, but decide to disregard it. In Operation Junction City, the Americans have partly met the second requirement of the battle plan for assault from the air, but not for their immediate drop zone. But what about the third requirement, control of the air? There are 2 degrees of air control. Air superiority, where you merely have an advantage over the enemy, and air supremacy, where control is total. Junction City, 1967. In Vietnam, the enemy does not have an air force. The Americans enjoy air supremacy. American commanders exploit this advantage in 2 ways. The first is in the transport of troops by helicopter. The second is to support troops on the ground, to eliminate or reduce opposition around American forces. In Operation Junction City, American planners therefore meet the third requirement for the battle plan for air assault, control of the air. Market Garden, 1944. 3 months earlier, in order to protect the D-Day troops on the beaches of Normandy, the Allies have established control of the skies in an arc over that part of Western Europe. By September, air supremacy is being extended to the Market Garden area. So the Allies appear to have fulfilled the requirement for control of the air. Except that air control also means something else, providing support for ground forces and eliminating or neutralizing enemy positions in the target area. Senior Allied commanders know of the presence of the 2 Panzer divisions in the Arnhem area. So the opportunity exists to use Allied air control to eliminate them and to support the tanks of 30 Corps linking up from Belgium. Incredibly, they do not take this opportunity.
The reason for the lack of fighter support in the air at the time was a decision taken by the commander of the Troop Carrier Command, Major General Paul Williams, to ensure that his pilots were kept safe by the Allied air forces being kept on the ground during the critical period of both supply and paratroop delivery. This had a catastrophic effect on the possibilities of both 30 Corps reaching the airborne troops and also of the airborne troops themselves surviving very difficult conditions on the ground.
In Market Garden, therefore, the Allies appeared to have met the requirement for air control. Then, amazingly, they failed to use it for air support. For the battle planners of Operations Junction City and Market Garden, the planning and preparation is over. The time has come to attack. Vietnam, 1966, and Holland, 1944. It's only when their troops jump that the commanders will see how their plans meet the next requirement in the battle plan for air assault. Speed and surprise. Once again, it was Operation Mercury in Crete which exemplified the importance of speed and surprise. Early morning, May 1941. The sky above Crete began to fill with incoming planes and gliders. As they descended from the skies, Student's men began to take the first of many losses. Defenders fired right into the flimsy canvas and wood gliders. Paratroops were shot dead while they were still in the air. At Retimo Airfield, 1,500 German paratroops were reduced to 1,000 in just 1 hour. At Heraklion, transport aircraft carrying airborne troops came in singly and were easy targets. Many were shot down in flames, with their airborne troops still inside them. By late afternoon of day one, nearly 40% of Student's assault force was dead, wounded, or taken prisoner. The German assault troops were falling victim to a fundamental weakness of the battle plan for air assault: vulnerability on landing. Student's planners began to consider aborting the operation. In Operation Junction City, Vietnam, first to go will be the paratroops of the 173rd Brigade. "845 men will take part in the jump. They will be led by their brigade commander, General John Dean. Commander of the actual assault task force is Lieutenant Colonel Robert Sigholz. They collect and check their chutes and file into their C-137 transports. Then the aircraft roll down the runway at Bien Hoa and climb into the sky. (0855). They are 5 minutes from the drop. (0900 hours). 173rd is over the DZ, the drop zone. General Dean moves to the right door, Lieutenant Colonel Sigholz to the left. Then they go. They are at the danger point of air assault, landing. They need speed and surprise, but not just for themselves. The next wave, a heavy equipment drop, is already airborne. Its ETA is 25 minutes away, and the paratroops aren't even on the ground. Operation Market Garden, 22 years earlier. Everything depends on seizing and holding the bridges from day one. But even before it starts, Market Garden faces a number of problems. There are insufficient transport aircraft to carry the Allied Airborne Army in one lift. Therefore, the landings will be spread over 3 days. Already, speed and surprise are in jeopardy. Because of fear of the flak around the key bridge at Arnhem, drop zones for the British 1st Airborne Division are up to 8 miles from the target. Speed and surprise have been compromised for security. So once they have landed, a spearhead force of armed jeeps will make straight for the bridge. September 17, 1944, early afternoon. The Screaming Eagles, the US 101st, encounter heavy flak. But they manage to land. Glider pilots and the pilots of the Dakotas bringing them in risk everything to get the men on the ground. Four Dakota pilots pay with their lives. The 101st move off and take their first targets. The All-Americans of the 82nd land and begin to battle their way toward their objectives.
The unsung heroes of Operation Market Garden are the men of the 2 American airborne divisions that land near Nijmegen and Eindhoven. These are the 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions that do a very good job of making an effective landing, of consolidating their positions, and of taking their objectives.
Near Arnhem, the gliders and airborne troops of the British 1st Division land successfully, but speed and surprise are lost as they take time to move off. The gliders carrying the armed jeeps which will make the dash for the Arnhem bridges are damaged on landing, and the jeeps have to be extracted from the wreckage. The delay gives the Germans vital time to organize. 1 mile into the 8-mile dash to the bridge, the jeeps are ambushed. The spearhead attack is lost. The airborne troops set out on foot to cover the 8 miles to their targets. They meet opposition from snipers, then armored cars. Their first objective, the railway bridge, is blown as 2 para begin to cross it. But they continue on toward the main objectives. So at first, Operation Market Garden meets the surprise requirement for air assault and overcomes the weakest part, the landing. But then it totally throws away these accomplishments by failing to move quickly. And what the men on the ground do not know is that the battle plan is in more jeopardy than even their worst nightmares. In the wreckage of a glider, the Germans find the body of an Allied officer. He has broken every rule of field security. He's carrying with him a full set of operation orders and marked maps for Operation Market Garden, including drop zones, timings, and objectives. The general to whom the plans are handed is none other than the architect of air assault itself, Kurt Student. The Allied battle plan has fallen into the hands of the enemy. The Germans organize their defenses and their attacks. By evening, the American 101st reach their first objective, the Somme Bridge, but it's blown as they prepare to take it. Within 36 hours, combat engineers have replaced it. The 82nd are still fighting forward. At Arnhem, men of the 2nd Parachute Battalion with elements of the 3rd battle their way to the northern end of their target, the road bridge. They have achieved the first objective in the battle plan. They have seized at least part of the bridge, but the Germans are still in control of the southern end. Market Garden has failed to meet the key airborne requirement of speed and surprise. But amazingly, because of the men on the ground, the Americans and the British, it's actually partway to achieving its objective and succeeding. All now depends on the next requirement. Reinforcement. Airborne troops are limited in what they carry. Everything they need they have to take with them. They're lightly armed. They have to be resupplied and reinforced.
Because they are so lightly armed, because they have so little in the way of supplies, airborne forces cannot sustain themselves for long. They have to be quickly relieved by more powerful forces coming by land or sea. In World War II, the rule of thumb for such relief was 48 hours.
The importance of this final requirement also became clear in Crete in May 1941. Having lost nearly 40% of their airborne assault force on the first day, Kurtstudent's men were in desperate need of reinforcement. But the vital airfields through which fresh troops and supplies must come had still not been captured. Suddenly, the fog of war saved Student's battle plan. Overnight, the Allied defenders on the dominating position above Malmö airfield, known as Point 107, pulled back unexpectedly. When Student's men assaulted the position, it was virtually undefended. The next morning, with his men still fighting to secure Malmö airfield, he sent in reinforcements. The airfield was a battleground. The Ju-52s came in with burning planes littering the airfield and exploding shells all around them. One plane even landed on top of the wreck of another. Still, however, they landed. Airborne troops jumped from them, manhandled their mortars and heavy machine guns out, and joined the fight. The Luftwaffe subjected Allied forces to incessant close support attacks. Over the next days, Student's men forced Allied troops back to be evacuated from the south coast. The Germans had won the first ever major assault from the air. Crucially, their rapid reinforcement and control of the air had overcome their failures of intelligence and speed and surprise. September 18th, 1944, day 2 of Operation Market Garden. The airborne troops, both British and American, are behind enemy lines and totally surrounded. The American 101st are being counterattacked. They beat off the Germans, hold on to their original objectives, and even advance and take Eindhoven. At Nijmegen, the 82nd, also under fierce counterattack, battle their way into the town center. But the bridge is still firmly in German hands. At the northern end of the bridge at Arnhem, men of the British 1st Airborne are holding on. The survival of all 3 units now depends on reinforcement by the tanks of 30 Corps. Tragically, the reinforcement requirement of the Market Garden battle plan has been poorly planned. The tanks are on their way to relieve the airborne units, but the route they will take is along a single road, across open countryside, often on top of embankments. They are exposed on the flanks and are targeted by well-hidden enemy positions. As lead tanks are knocked out, the single route is blocked.
The airborne portion was very well done, but insufficient thought was given to how to link up to the relief. To put a force as large as 30 Corps on a single road was the height of folly.
Having taken heavy losses, the first tanks of 30 Corps reached the 101st at the bridge north of Eindhoven on September 19th, a day behind schedule. On the same day, gliders manage to get in artillery to the 82nd, which enables them to fight on. But at Arnhem, much-needed supplies dropped by the RAF fall directly into German hands. As the second wave comes in, the Germans are waiting at the landing zones, detailed in the plans that they have captured. In the chaos, the surviving reinforcements are cut off far from the bridge. The morning of the next day, September 20th, the 82nd at Grave are finally reached by tanks of 30 Corps. They then try to battle their way through to the Nijmegen Bridge, but are beaten back. At Arnhem, the British airborne troops are out of food and almost out of ammunition. But incredibly, like the 82nd and the 101st, they hold on. The battle plan is still achievable. On the afternoon of September 20th, the fourth day of the operation, the American paratroops paddle across the River Vaal at Nijmegen under heavy fire in assault boats. They seize the northern ends of both the rail and road bridges as the tanks of 30 Corps cross from the south. But it's too late. On the morning of the 21st, an attempt by 30 Corps to push on is halted by panzers 4 miles from Arnhem. Low on ammunition and with no infantry support, the situation is grim. At almost the same moment, without reinforcement, the British paratroops at the bridge are finally overrun by German Waffen-SS units.
The two American airborne divisions, the 101st and the 82nd, had done a remarkable job to keep the road open for 30 Corps. Interestingly, just as 30 Corps begin to cross Nijmegen Bridge across the Vaal, British paratroopers are overwhelmed at Arnhem Bridge. Had the British 30 Corps managed to cross just a few hours earlier, then perhaps the two elements of the operation, the airborne forces, the Brits at Arnhem, and 30 Corps having travelled up from Belgium through Eindhoven and then Nijmegen, could have linked up and the operation could have been a great success.
Other units hold out for several days before many escape across the river and the remainder surrender. Operation Market Garden overall has been a costly failure. As a result, the war in Europe will drag on for months. In Vietnam, 22 years later, Operation Junction City is going according to plan. There is no enemy contact during the jump. Junction City has passed the speed and surprise requirement. The operation has also gotten through the first danger point of assault from the air, the landing. Within 20 minutes of landing, the parachute battalion of the 173rd Brigade is on the ground and has set up a defensive perimeter. Their reinforcements are right behind them. Just 5 minutes later, the first equipment drop comes out of the sky. And shortly thereafter, the air mobile assault comes in by helicopter with the rest of the 173rd Brigade. The air assault phase of the Junction City battle plan is completed when the lightly armed assault paratroops receive the rest of their equipment. The 173rd Brigade then moves on to the next stage of Junction City, working with the ground forces to clear War Zone C of the Viet Cong. So how did Operations Market Garden and Junction City meet the requirements for the battle plan for air assault? Objective. The Allies in Market Garden and the Americans on Junction City both had a clear objective, and that objective could only be secured by an assault from the air. Intelligence. For Market Garden, the planners had the key piece of intelligence, the presence of the 2 SS Panzer divisions, but decided to go ahead regardless. For Junction City, there was no intelligence on the drop zone, but the assault paratroops of the 173rd faced little opposition. Air control. Market Garden failed to exploit a key component of air control, to take out enemy defenses. Junction City enjoyed and exploited full air control. Speed and surprise. Market Garden achieved surprise, but lost speed against the strength and rapid reaction of the defenders. Junction City achieved both. Reinforcement. In Market Garden, the plans to reinforce went disastrously wrong. Combined with the failure to act on their intelligence and exploit air control, the inability of the planners to reinforce all their airborne forces ensured the failure of the overall battle plan. In Junction City, once the paratroops had landed, reinforcement was almost immediate. The air assault phase of the Junction City battle plan was a success. Within 2 weeks, the whole of War Zone C had been cleared. 35 years later, the 173rd Airborne were again in the public eye. This time in Operation Iraqi Freedom against Saddam Hussein, as they dropped into northern Iraq to seize the key airfield at Bashur. Once again, they provided the solution to a situation where assault from the air was the best option. Assault from the air is still always on the edge, and therefore always needs to be changing. But as the technology, both of air assault and of the weapons that can be used against it change, what of the future?
Armies around the world continue to invest heavily in both helicopters and heliborne forces. This is despite a growing consensus among military theorists that helicopters are far too vulnerable to ground fire, to the fire of machine guns, to the fire of RPGs, to the fire of handheld anti-aircraft missiles, to be of too much use over enemy territory. They are no longer the weapons of war that they once were.
And what about air assault by parachute?
The advantages of the use of parachute troops themselves are still with us. They will remain probably throughout the 21st century. The difficulty is, however, that they are highly vulnerable when on the ground. As a result of that, we seem to see the use of parachute troops being used in a much more specific way.
It is unlikely that there will ever be mass drops again like those during World War II. Instead, parachute insertion will be used for specific purposes. Special forces raiding or releasing hostages. Elite units seizing a specific target. As always with assault from the air, it will continue only to be used when there is no viable alternative.